We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The air inside the penthouse was thick with money, perfume, and fake smiles. Chicago's skyline glittered behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. People dressed in expensive suits and hand-picked designer gowns floated around the room with glasses of champagne, laughing like they had no idea the ground beneath them was shifting. Troy Maddox stood at the center of it all. Everyone had come for him. Tonight was supposed to be the celebration of a lifetime, his promotion to senior director at VoxenTech. Years of breaking his back in server rooms and sleepless coding marathons had finally paid off. His boss, Clay Vinter, had pulled him aside a week ago and said, "You've earned it, Maddox. The board's in. Big things ahead." Troy should have felt proud. Powerful. Untouchable. Instead, he's gut twisted. Delaney stood across the room in a silver gown, her back straight, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was counting allies. She hadn't kissed him when they arrived. She hadn't even held his hand. And now, as the chatter dimmed and Clay stepped forward to hand him a mic for a thank you speech, she moved beside him with slow, deliberate steps. People clapped. Someone popped another bottle. Clay's voice boomed through the speaker system, a toast to the man who made it happen, Troy Maddox. The spotlight burned hot on his skin. He smiled, took the mic, and began to speak. Delaney gently touched his arm. "May I?" He nodded. She turned toward the crowd. Calm. Composed. "Let's toast," she said, her voice steady, "to the man who stole this job." The room fell silent. He's not a leader. He's a fraud. Glass slipped from someone's hand. A sharp crash echoed across the marble. And just like that, everything stopped. The word still echoed in his ears as if someone had shouted it into a canyon and it refused to die. He's a fraud. Troy couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The people who had clapped just seconds ago now stared at him with narrowed eyes, whispering behind polished fingers. Executives from the upper floors glanced at each other with raised brows. The boardroom players. The media representatives, even the waitstaff froze mid-step. He turned to Delaney. His wife. Her face was blank. No sign of regret. No flicker of fear. Just ice. "What are you doing?" he whispered under his breath. She didn't answer. She faced the crowd again and said, "Ask him how he got here. Ask him who really pitched the ideas he takes credit for. Ask him what he did to the guy who went missing from his team last year." Troy's chest tightened. "Ask him," she added, "how many lies he told to climb." Clay Vinter stepped forward. "Delaney," he said gently, like a concerned boss, "maybe this isn't the right time." "No," she snapped. "This is the time. The world should know." Troy could feel eyes boring into him from every direction. This was his moment. His party. His promotion. His life. But standing there, humiliated and betrayed, he realized something far worse than what was being said out loud. This had been planned. She didn't lose control. She wasn't drunk or overwhelmed. Delaney had waited for the right moment to cut him down. And she'd chosen tonight. Right at his peak. So this was his wife. This was his reality now. His world shattered, not by an enemy, but by the one person who once said forever. The headlines were already live before Troy made it home. VoxenTech star Troy Maddox accused of fraud by wife at promotion party, corporate hero or thief. Inside the Maddox meltdown, by morning, the phone had stopped ringing, but the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. The board issued a statement, temporary suspension pending internal review. Clay Vinter didn't answer any of Troy's calls. And Delaney? She'd left the apartment before sunrise. Troy sat alone in the kitchen, still in the same suit, staring at the untouched cake from the night before. The one that read, "Congratulations, Troy. You earned this." The taste of betrayal was stronger than the champagne ever could be. He thought back to everything he'd done to get here. The overtime. The all-nighters. The nights Delaney begged him to come to bed and he said, "Just a few more hours, babe." This pitch could change everything. Now he realized, that pitch? The one that got him noticed? It was the one Delaney had seen first. She'd read his notes. Asked questions. Sat in on his dry runs. And now he understood why. It wasn't support. It was surveillance. He looked around his apartment like it wasn't even his anymore. The promotion wasn't just taken, it was turned into a weapon. A trophy he was never meant to keep. His face burned with shame. Not because of the lies they told, but because of how easily the people he trusted believed them. The world didn't want truth. It wanted spectacle. And they got one. But what they didn't see, Troy Maddox was done playing fair. And this betrayal? It was going to be the beginning of something much bigger. The next few days blurred together like smoke from a fire that refused to burn out. Troy didn't go back to the office. He didn't check emails. He didn't even change clothes. The only thing he did was watch replays of the party, over and over, frame by frame. Someone had leaked the video from their phone. It went viral. Edited clips surfaced on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Even daytime talk shows began dissecting the scene like it was some kind of drama made for ratings. They were all calling it the party that exposed a fraud. But Troy knew better. This wasn't exposure. This was execution. And Delaney? She hadn't made a single public statement. Not a word. But her silence was louder than any lie. People filled in the blanks. Whispers turned to narratives. Memes. Headlines. Hate. And still, Clay hadn't returned a single message. Not one. Troy sat on his living room floor, surrounded by the same trophies and framed certificates that had once meant something. His world had been set on fire at a party thrown in his name. He pressed play on the clip again. Watched Clay step forward with that smug, calculated face. Watched Delaney lift her glass. Watched himself smile, so clueless. So trusting. He paused it right there. On his own face. The exact second before his life split in two. He stared at it for minutes. That was the man who thought hard work could protect him. That was the man who thought love couldn't betray. That man was dead. And what came next? Wouldn't be about cleaning up the mess. It would be about burning everything that caused it. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the noise to die down. Not because people forgot, but because something newer, shinier came along to distract the world. Troy disappeared from headlines, but not from memory. Especially not from his own. He moved out of the apartment. Packed what little hadn't been tainted by betrayal. Delaney had never come back. No note. No call. Nothing. Fine. She could have it. He didn't want her version of home anyway. He settled into a cheap studio across the river. One window. One desk. One mission. He pinned a single word to the wall in red marker, mine. His career? His reputation? His name? They had stolen everything he worked for. But they didn't take what mattered most, his ability to fight back. They didn't know him. Delaney thought she killed his drive. Clay thought he was too soft to retaliate. The board thought he'd crawl away in shame. But they forgot one thing. Everything he had, he earned. Now he would take it all back. Not with shouting. Not with public statements or lawsuits or online pity. He would do it with silence. Precision. And fire. He started rebuilding. Burner accounts. Proxy servers. Fake names. Quiet connections with former clients who still owed him favors. He wasn't planning revenge. He was building a system. A network designed to expose everything they'd ever hidden. And once it was ready, he wouldn't just take back what was his. He'd make sure they never forgot who it belonged to. She used to call him her safe place. That was the line that echoed most when he couldn't sleep. "You're the only one I trust, Troy. The only one who makes me feel safe." The first time she said it, he believed her. He remembered the early days, back when they'd lived in a one-bedroom apartment with cracked tiles and second-hand furniture. She'd laughed then. She'd kissed him like he was her entire future. So what changed? Was it when he got successful? Was it when she felt left behind? Or had she always been waiting for the right moment to twist the knife? Troy sat in the dark, her wedding dress still hanging in the back of the closet. He hadn't burned it. Not yet. Some part of him needed the reminder. This wasn't just betrayal. This was strategy. She didn't just cheat. She aligned herself with the one man who could destroy Troy's entire career. Clay Vinter. That name boiled in his blood. Delaney hadn't fallen in love with someone else. She'd chosen power over loyalty. Prestige over memory. Clay had given her a front-row seat to Troy's downfall. And she hadn't just watched, she clapped. Troy stood in the middle of the empty room, staring at the spot where their wedding photo used to hang. She didn't just stop being his wife. She became his enemy. And the worst kind of enemy is the one who knows your heart. But she'd forgotten something. She wasn't the only one who could play a long game. Troy would make her regret trading love for leverage. Troy never forgot the exact way she said it. "Let's toast to the man who stole this job." The words haunted him, but not because of the humiliation. That had already passed. What stayed with him now was the calmness in her voice. The rehearsed rhythm. The exact placement of every phrase like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. Because it had. He knew it now. Delaney hadn't just blurted out that speech. She prepared it. She planned it. She waited until the right people were watching, the board members, the investors, the media. Because that moment wasn't for Troy. It was for them. And the deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. One of his old teammates, Marcus, had quit months ago after a quiet dispute with Clay. Troy found him living in a trailer outside Joliet, halfway drunk but clear enough to speak one hard truth. Clay told Delaney to do it. Troy's jaw clenched. Told her what? That if she humiliated you publicly, it would force the board to suspend you. Clay's play was to slide into your role once the dust settled. She was the bullet. He just loaded the gun. Troy sat in silence. He didn't even blink. That confirmed it. His own wife had been a tool in someone else's plan. But she didn't just go along with it. She leaned into it. Perfected it. She told the lie. Repeated it. Owned it. And now? Troy was going to tell a story of his own. Only his version wouldn't be made of speeches. It would be built from evidence. And the ending? Wouldn't be redemption. It would be reckoning. It started with a whisper, then spread like wildfire. By the time Troy uploaded the first encrypted folder, over 100 people had received it. A few were Voxen Tech employees. Others were clients. One was an investigative reporter he once helped get out of a lawsuit. Every folder contained fragments. Enough to spark curiosity, not suspicion. Just little breadcrumbs. Memos. Screenshots. Timelines. Nothing that screamed criminal, but everything that suggested something was deeply off. Within hours, speculation flooded Slack channels and encrypted forums. Then came the anonymous email drops. Fake identities. Proxy servers. Digital fog. Troy never used his name. But everyone was talking. And Clay felt it. The company held an emergency executive meeting. Delaney was nowhere to be found, but her name started reappearing in internal threads. Someone even leaked a message, "Is this about what happened at Troy's party?" He didn't seem guilty. She did. Troy watched the chaos unfold from his new apartment, sipping black coffee like it was champagne. They wanted to expose him in front of everyone. Now everyone was going to see them. Not as leaders. Not as visionaries. But as liars who smiled in front of cameras while laundering trust behind firewalls. And once everyone knew the truth, there would be no press statement, no boardroom speech, no exit strategy clean enough to wash it away. This wasn't just damage. This was implosion. Clay Vinter was used to control. He was the man who always had the final say, the closing line in every meeting, the last handshake, the signature that sealed futures. But not this time. His back. That was the first thing whispered across the floor during a silent moment in the break room. Not Troy. Not Maddox. Just he. The ghost they thought they buried. Clay paced his office, staring at the screens filled with analytics, watching engagement spikes and back-end data leaks he couldn't trace. He called IT. Legal. Security. They couldn't stop it. Files were moving. Patterns forming. His past, unraveling. He walked to the window, looking over the city he used to rule. Delaney had stopped returning his calls. She had played her part, and now she was slipping into shadows too. It wasn't just the data breach. It was the timing. The precision. Whoever was doing this knew exactly what to touch, and when. And Clay realized something that shook him to his core. This wasn't an outside attack. This was someone who knew the system. Someone with access. History. Motive. Someone he had underestimated. "He's coming for us," Clay whispered to himself. And deep down? He knew exactly who he was. They had no idea what he was capable of until he took something back. Troy stared at the interface he built, Riggs Analytics. On the surface, it looked like just another private consultancy. But behind the firewall was a world Clay and Delaney couldn't see coming. He hadn't just learned the system. He built it. Most of the tools Voxentech bragged about at expos and investor calls. The skeleton code came from him. Late nights. Headphones on. Delaney asleep on the couch, or pretending to be. Every brilliant innovation they patented had Troy's DNA coded deep inside. So when people asked, did he really steal this job? The truth was simpler than they knew. They stole everything from him. His vision. His trust. His future. And now, he was going to take something back. But not a title. Not a desk. Control. Late at night, he hacked into a forgotten shell database, an old server Clay probably assumed was wiped. It wasn't. He found payroll irregularities. Offshore transfers. Silent payments routed through fake vendors. One document caught his eye, Project Drift, authorized by C. The Vinter, approved by D. Maddox. It was real. They had been stealing not just his position, but from the company itself. And they used his promotion to cover it. A headline popped into his mind. The man who stole back what was already his. He smiled. Let's see how they like being robbed. Every step of this was bigger than revenge. Troy knew that now. It wasn't just about evening the score. It was about ending the system that let people like Clay and Delaney thrive while honest people bled. This, what he was building, was more than a comeback. It was a correction. A redirection of power, back to the people who actually did the work. He created a decentralized leak network, something powerful, invisible, and safe for whistleblowers. Employees could upload corruption evidence without names, without fear. And they were. Quickly. Dozens of files started pouring in. Emails. Recordings. Documents. It wasn't just Clay and Delaney. It was the entire executive circle. Cover-ups. Backdoor deals. Intellectual property theft. Troy watched it all flood in like water over a dam that had finally cracked. "This is what they never saw coming," he whispered. He opened a private chat with a tech reporter he trusted. "Anonymous sender, what if I told you everything you've heard about Vox and Tech is only the surface?" He hit send and leaned back. This wasn't just a takedown. It was a cleansing fire. And the match was already lit. He was nobody now. No job. No badge. No paycheck. No HR rep, but Troy had never felt more focused. This was the first time in his life he wasn't answering to someone else's clock. No supervisor. No boardroom. No rehearsed smile. Just purpose. He rolled up his sleeves, cracked his knuckles, and whispered to himself, "Let's get to work." From his small apartment, he created a fake identity using a hybrid of AI-generated data and old resumes from his past. Colton Riggs was born. A consultant. Private. Elusive. A digital ghost. Through this identity, he submitted an application for a confidential security audit to Vox and Tech. And they approved it. Clay's team didn't know it yet. But they had just hired the man they tried to destroy. While Troy typed, the corner of his screen flickered with live comments. His anonymous posts had reached millions. Viewers were watching. He glanced at the webcam, smiled slightly, and said, almost like a whisper, as if speaking straight through the screen, "By the way, if you're watching this from New York, LA, Houston, or maybe a quiet town nobody knows exists, but you call home, tell me. Drop the name in the comments. I see you." He grinned. "You're not just watching a takedown. You're part of it now." And just like that, the screen cut to black. No flashy graphics. No outro. Just a pause. Long enough to make you want the next move. "He's the man they thought was gone." That's what one comment said under a reposted clip of Troy's voiceover. "He's the ghost behind the leaks. He's the shadow in Clay Ventus' rear view." But Troy wasn't hiding. He was positioning. He now had access to Vox and Tech's internal audit systems, thanks to the identity of Colton Riggs. Through his login credentials, he quietly slid through archived chat logs, compliance forms, and vendor contracts. And there it was. An untraceable series of withdrawals, signed by Clay and verified by Delaney. It wasn't embezzlement anymore. It was organized fraud. Millions in fake vendor payouts. Employee terminations timed to silence whistleblowers. Data manipulations before quarterly earnings. But Clay had made one mistake. He believed the system made him untouchable. Troy was about to prove otherwise. Inside the next report he submitted, Colton Riggs included one subtle anomaly in the system, a ghost invoice worth $0, buried inside the logs, but labeled with a code. R.FND his .T. It was a message. Not for Clay. Not for Delaney. For anyone watching close enough to understand what was coming. He's not angry anymore. He's not grieving. He's operating. And now, they wouldn't just lose their reputations. They'd lose the empire they built on lies. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. Delaney hadn't seen her name in print since the promotion party. But now it was there, in a confidential memo stamped with Vox and Tech's security seal, subject, Anonymous Threat Report, Asset Code A. The first line read, "You were Asset A. You approved everything. That makes you accountable." Her eyes widened. She dropped the letter on the kitchen floor. Clay wasn't picking up her calls anymore. The media hadn't caught her name yet. But internally? Executives were whispering. Compliance was circling. A means anonymous in corporate lingo. But this time, A stood for access. Authorization. Accomplice. She opened her laptop and searched for any mentions of Project Drift. It was scrubbed. All traces of the offshore accounts disappeared. Then, an email popped up. From unknown Zender at nullnet.com. Subject: you opened the door. Inside the body was a single line: don't worry. You won't be alone in the fall. Her heart raced. Was this what it felt like when the game turned? She reached for her wine glass, but her hand was shaking too much to hold it steady. Delaney Maddox had been many things. Beautiful. Clever. Strategic. But for the first time in her life, she felt cornered. The word had become a weapon. One they used to crush him. But now, Troy stared at the evidence. Not speculation. Not rumor. Proof. Clay Vinter was the architect. Delaney was the executor. Together, they'd buried money, manipulated data, and used Troy as the face of their deception. All under one ugly word: fraud. Troy sat in front of 4 screens. Data flashing. Audio clips playing. Names cross-referencing. He didn't just want revenge anymore, he wanted precision. He isolated a phone call recording from 6 months ago between Clay and a compliance officer. Clay, that contract's under Delaney's sign-off. I'm clean. You push it through. Officer, won't it get flagged? Clay, only if Maddox ever finds it. And trust me, he won't. Troy smiled. He clipped the audio. Labeled it Episode 1. A DokuLeak series was about to launch, anonymously, of course. Not in a flashy viral drop. But quietly. One clip at a time. Each one titled with the exact word they tried to bury him under. Fraud. But this time, it wouldn't describe him. It would define them. So this is what it feels like. To have the power they once used to break you, in your hands. Troy sat on a rooftop parking deck, laptop on his knees, the wind biting through his hoodie. Below, Voxentech's HQ glowed like a glass fortress, unaware of the storm brewing in its shadow. He uploaded the first episode. Fraud Episode 1, The Wire that spoke no dramatic music. No face reveal. Just clean audio. A deep voice narrating Clay's incriminating call, overlaid with timestamps and financial data. It hit Twitter at 7:03 p.m. By 7:17, it had 8,000 retweets. By 8:02, Voxentech's hashtag was trending globally. By 9 o'clock, Clay's assistant leaked an internal memo marked Crisis Response, Level 2. Troy watched it all from the roof. Calm. Still. Unbothered. So, you thought I'd disappear, he said quietly. You thought humiliation was enough to erase me. He pulled his hoodie tighter and stood up. So let me show you what I learned in the dark. They left him with nothing. So he built something unstoppable. So they could feel what it was like to lose something they thought they'd never have to fight for. I'm not the villain, Troy said into the MIC. His voice was steady. Controlled. Deepened through a filter that masked his identity. I'm the consequence. His DokuLeak series had reached a new level. Episode 2 dropped at dawn, titled The Invisible Cuts. It detailed how Voxentech laid off 37 employees without severance to fund Clay's private property acquisitions. Troy spliced in anonymous testimonies. A janitor. A junior developer. A pregnant woman who lost her insurance mid-trimester. And at the center of it all? One signature. Delaney Maddox. The comment section exploded. He's not leaking. He's liberating. Whoever this is, he's doing what journalists won't. Troy didn't respond. He wasn't in it for applause. He was building a legacy out of ashes. He whispered into the MIC again, I am not your story. I am your reckoning. And he pressed upload. Delaney sat in her lawyer's office, a glass of untouched water in front of her. Did you sign those layoffs? He asked, not looking up from the file. She hesitated. It was standard policy. Clay handled most of it. But your name is on it. The lawyer slid over a printed transcript of episode 2. Her voice. Her decisions. Her guilt, exposed one layer at a time. "Did you think this wouldn't come back around?" he asked. She looked away. The lawyer leaned forward. "You need to talk to someone before it gets worse. FBI, SEC, and someone. Because whoever's doing this, they're not stopping." Delaney's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "You still think you were the mastermind?" She stood up abruptly. "I need air." Outside, the world didn't look the same anymore. The streets. The sky. Even her reflection in the glass door, it all looked like a life borrowed from someone else. She had power once. Now? She had a past that was eating itself alive. And the worst part? She still didn't know just how far he would go. Before everything fell apart, there was a moment. A single moment where it could have gone the other way. 16 months ago. Delaney sat across from Clay Vinter in the back booth of a dimly lit bar, one of those corporate lounges where privacy was an illusion, and deals were sealed with nods over whiskey. She wore red. Not her usual look. Not for Troy, anyway. Clay swirled his glass. "You ever feel like you're wasting time playing supportive wife while someone else gets all the credit?" Delaney didn't answer. She didn't need to. Clay smirked. "You're smarter than him. You've got instinct. He's good at tech, but you're good at people." Her fingers tapped the glass rim, quiet but rhythmic. Her eyes didn't blink. "You're saying I should turn on him?" she asked. "I'm saying," Clay replied, leaning closer, "you already know you will." There was no kiss. No hand-holding. Just strategy. Clay had seen the wear in her voice whenever she talked about Troy's late nights, his obsession with perfection, the way he chased approval from people who never clapped. And Delaney? She saw something else in Clay, danger, yes, but also opportunity. He promised her influence. A place at the table. Real power. But what he didn't say out loud was the other truth: he needed a scapegoat. Someone to throw under the bus when the walls came crashing down. And Troy? He was the perfect name to burn. The deal was sealed in silence. And Delaney walked out of that bar with a decision that would set the future on fire. Voxentech's front doors flew open like the gates of a collapsing empire. News cameras lined the steps. Reporters swarmed security guards. The headline that morning? Whistleblower drops full email chain, Clay Vinter implicated in $17 million embezzlement pattern. It wasn't just a leak. It was a data dump, raw, verifiable, time-stamped chaos. Troy had timed it perfectly. A Monday morning, just as investors were set to meet. Just as stocks were stabilizing. Just as the PR team thought they'd bought themselves a breath. The breath was gone. Clay stepped into the boardroom with a stone face, but the moment he sat down, one of the execs slid a folder across the table. Inside, printouts of the exact documents from the leak. He looked up. They were all watching him like a disease under glass. "This is a setup," Clay said. "This is a coordinated hit job." "Is it?" one voice replied. "Because your signature is on every page." Meanwhile, on the 14th floor, Delaney tried to access the internal server. Access denied. Her email was locked. Her badge failed. Security approached. "You'll need to come with us." She tried to stay calm. "Why?" "I'm a consultant, not an employee. You're under review for ethics violations. Effective immediately, all your credentials are suspended." Her breath caught. This was happening. It was all unraveling. From a rooftop miles away, Troy watched live coverage on his laptop. Not smiling. Not celebrating. Just still. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was balance. The world had finally tilted back to where it should have been. And this? This was only the beginning. He stood at the exact same spot. Same penthouse. Same floor-to-ceiling windows. Same chandelier above. But this time, the light was different. No spotlight. No applause. No Delaney. Just silence. Troy wore black. No tie. No nervous smile. He wasn't here for a party. He was here for the closure. The space had been rented out by a non-profit. Some financial integrity event. The irony wasn't lost on him. He wandered toward the far window, looking down at the city lights, the same view he'd seen the night he lost everything. But that man, the one who stood at this very place, watching his world collapse under the weight of betrayal, he didn't exist anymore. Behind him, someone approached. A familiar voice, "Didn't think I'd see you back here." It was Clay. Unshaven. Tired. His tailored suit didn't fit right anymore. "You lost," Troy said without turning around. Clay exhaled a laugh. Bitter. Hollow. "You think this is a win? You destroyed a billion-dollar company." "No," Troy replied. "I exposed the rot before it collapsed on its own." Clay stepped closer. "You could have come to me. Talked it out. We could have cleaned it quietly." Troy turned to face him, eyes cold. "You wanted quiet. I wanted justice." Clay stared at him. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. Troy stepped forward, calm and unmoved. "I already regret trusting you." And with that, he walked past him, slow, deliberate, final. At this place. Where it began. Where it ended. Not as the broken man they tried to bury, but as the man who rose right through the fire. He looked into the cameras, not as a man clearing his name, but as someone who had already moved beyond the accusation. Troy sat in a leather chair inside a quiet podcast studio in downtown Chicago. No lights. No big sponsors. Just one mic and a single question from the host: "Why now?" He paused for a moment, then leaned in. "Because it was never about clearing my name," he said. "It was about showing people what happens when the right person fights back." The episode wasn't planned. But someone from the investigative team had reached out, quietly, asking if he'd be willing to speak. Just once. On record. As the man who had taken down a corporate titan with nothing but truth and strategy. He agreed, not to go viral, but because there were people still questioning what really happened. People who still whispered the word fraud when they said his name. So, this time, he used the word himself. "Yes, they called me a fraud. My own wife. In public. On the night I got promoted." He paused. "But you know what? That night wasn't mine." He looked at the host. "This one is." He went on to talk about his journey, not just the revenge, but the rebuilding. The clarity. The things he learned about himself in the dark. And the episode closed on a simple statement: "They took everything that was mine. So I took something back." No anger. No revenge speech. Just peace. And power. Voxenteca's board of directors dissolved within 10 days of the data drop. A federal investigation opened. Shareholders pulled out. The valuation collapsed like dominoes. And in the middle of the chaos, a small but quietly powerful private firm stepped forward, Riggs Analytics. Led by an unknown consultant named Colton Riggs, the firm purchased Voxenteca's broken shell for a fraction of its former worth. It was the same company Troy had built, hidden behind layers of digital firewalls, names, and blind LLCs. Clay never saw the paperwork. By the time he did, it was too late. The man they accused. The man they fired. The man they called a fraud. Now owned the ruins of the company they once used to bury him. And he wasn't rebuilding it for glory. He was repurposing it for justice, education, transparency. The very things Voxentec claimed to stand for, but never actually did. He promoted a former intern to CEO. A woman who had once been let go during a budget cut Clay initiated. And during the press briefing, she stood at the podium and said, "This company was built on exploitation. It's time we build something else." Someone asked from the crowd, "Where's Mr. Riggs?" She smiled. "He prefers to stay behind the scenes." And Troy, watching from his apartment, smiled too. The best kind of promotion is the kind that doesn't need a stage. Clay Vinter walked into the ballroom with the confidence of a man trying to fake control. It was meant to be a damage-controlled mixer, a high-end, exclusive investor event thrown together by what remained of his network. A final attempt to convince people that the ship wasn't sinking. That he still had influence. But no one smiled when he entered. No one clapped. Most of them were already aware of the leaked footage. The reports. The financial trail. They were here to watch him drown, not save him. He walked from one table to the next, pitching fake optimism, dodging pointed questions, laughing nervously at half-hearted greetings. But then, mid-conversation, a security officer approached him. "Mr. Vinter, there's a federal agent waiting outside. You've been requested for questioning." Clay blinked. "Now?" "It's urgent." Silence rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" Clay's throat went dry. He tried to excuse himself calmly, but the walk felt like a march. Every step toward that door took more of his image away. As he exited, Troy sat in his car across the street, window cracked, engine off. He wasn't watching for vengeance anymore. He was watching the final act of a story Clay thought he controlled. The party they tried to destroy him at had turned into Clay's funeral. Not in death, but in identity. The mighty executive. The boardroom killer. The puppet master. Now? Just a man in a cheap suit, escorted out of his own empire. And Troy? He didn't need to speak. The silence said everything. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Delaney sat on the edge of a motel bed, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, staring at her phone like it might start bleeding. No calls. No messages. No invitations. Nothing. The world she once owned had moved on, without her. The executive friends. The press. Even the silence between her and Clay now felt final. He was facing indictment. And she? She was facing obscurity. "My life," she whispered. "It used to mean something. Designer purses. Power lunches. Corporate panels. Social clout. Now she had a suitcase full of clothes no one envied, and a laptop filled with rejection emails. She tried to write a redemption post, a carefully worded statement to the press. But it sounded hollow. She couldn't undo the damage. And deep down, a part of her knew. She never meant for it to go this far. She wanted power. Not destruction. But she had backed the wrong man. And betrayed the only one who ever actually loved her. Troy. She thought of him now, cold, strategic, smarter than she ever gave him credit for. She had watched him fall. And now she was watching him rise, without saying a single word to her. That silence? It hurt more than anything. This wasn't just karma. It was exile. And the most painful part of all? She had done it to herself. Troy stood outside the courthouse, watching the revolving glass doors, debating whether to step inside. Delaney had been summoned. An ethics committee hearing. Possible charges. Possible time. He hadn't planned this part. He never wanted to see her in cuffs. Never wanted to see her truly ruined. She used to be his wife. That word didn't mean much to him anymore. But once, it had meant everything. He remembered their tiny wedding. The way she clutched his hand like she was scared to let go. The way she whispered, "I'll protect your heart even when you can't." He had believed her. Now she sat in a courtroom fighting to protect herself from the fallout she helped cause. He walked inside. Not to confront her. Just to see. The hearing was behind closed doors. But as he stood near the hallway, he saw her exit a side room. She looked thinner, tired, small. And for a brief second, her eyes met his. No rage. No pride. Just silence. She stepped toward him. "You came." "I didn't come for you," he replied, voice low. "I came for closure. Troy. I didn't know he'd take it this far, you helped him build it." She swallowed. "I thought I was climbing. I didn't realize I was falling." He looked at her like someone staring at a ghost they once loved. "I didn't come here to hate you," he said. "I came here to make sure I never forget." And with that, he turned and walked away. His wife was gone. This was just the echo. Delaney sat at the edge of her motel bathtub, a glass of cheap wine in one hand and a notepad in the other. The room was quiet except for the buzzing of a dying ceiling fan. She began to write, not to manipulate. Not for press. But for herself. A confession. Not of love. But of guilt. "I told them what Clay told me to say," she wrote. "I told the world he was a fraud, even when I didn't fully understand what Clay was planning." She paused. Her hand trembled. "I thought I was saving my future. I was just burning everything that mattered." She flipped to a fresh page and addressed it to someone she never expected to write to again. "Troy. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve closure. But if I ever meant anything to you, I want you to know that I remember the man you were. I remember how hard you worked. And I remember that I broke something I never had the right to touch." She folded the letter but didn't mail it. She tucked it under her pillow. Maybe for the police. Maybe for her own peace. Her phone buzzed again. Anonymous message: "Your story's already out there. But your truth? That's still up to you." Delaney stared into the mirror. Pale skin. Dull eyes. A stranger in a borrowed room. She had told the world lies. Now, for the first time, she wanted to tell the truth. It hit like a bullet with no sound. The full data drop went live at midnight. Not on a gossip blog. Not through a press leak. But on a sleek, encrypted website built specifically for the truth. TheEvidenceFiles.com, subtitled, "Everyone Deserves to Know." The homepage was simple: black background, white font, and a single prompt: "Who do you want to see the truth about?" Click on Vox and Tech, and it opened like a vault. Email chains. Financial reports. Offshore accounts. Meeting transcripts. Each item was tagged, time-stamped, and verified. Delaney's signature. Clay's voice. Boardroom bribes. And then, the headline that set the internet on fire: "He wasn't the fraud. He was the cover." News stations scrambled to verify. Twitter erupted with screenshots. Reddit threads exploded with speculation, analysis, support. Everyone who had once watched the party clip of Delaney calling Troy a fraud now watched the opposite unfold. The internet doesn't forget. But sometimes, it flips the narrative. Troy didn't post a victory video. No statement. No live stream. He didn't have to. His silence became myth. And the phrase started trending: "Everyone knows now." Clay's lawyers issued denials. Delaney's old interviews were dissected frame by frame. Vox and Tech's stock collapsed overnight. And Troy? He stood alone in a coffee shop, hoodie pulled low, watching it all unfold on the TV above the bar. He didn't need applause. He just needed truth. And now, everyone had it. Clay Vinter looked smaller than anyone had ever seen him. Unshaven. Tie loose. Cuffed wrists. He was led through the back of a courthouse as cameras flashed from every direction. No limo. No entourage. No press agent. Just a man who built an empire on manipulation, walking toward its grave. Inside the hearing, the judge didn't smile. The prosecutor didn't waste time. Count after count of corporate fraud, wire tampering, insider laundering. The evidence was airtight, and worse, traceable. For the first time in his career, Clay had no angle, no favor to pull, no last card to play. But the moment that broke him wasn't legal. It was personal. A reporter outside shouted as he was escorted out, "Do you have anything to say to Troy Maddox?" Clay paused. For a flicker of a second, his lips tightened. Then, he looked up at the cameras and said, "He warned me once." That was it. No denial. No defense. Just one short sentence that proved the world's suspicions true. Troy hadn't attacked him. He'd given him a chance. He'd warned him back when it could have been handled quietly. And Clay ignored it. Now? He was walking into a courtroom that he'd once believed he'd never see from the inside. The boardrooms were gone. The microphones were gone. And what remained? A man named Clay Vinter. And he had become the cautionary tale. Troy leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, laptop open, but untouched. He wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about value. Not the kind you cash out, but the kind you almost lost forever. They said he stole the job. That he cut corners. Used tricks. Cheated systems. But the truth? He was the one who had everything stolen from him. Trust. Time. The chance to live a normal life without suspicion clouding every handshake. And for what? A promotion that was a setup. A wife who wasn't loyal. A system that was waiting to bury him the moment someone said the right lie loud enough. Now, sitting in a small, clean space he owned with no name on the door, he finally felt clear. He never needed the job. He needed justice. He didn't need to go back. He needed to move forward. He opened a document titled, "They Said I Stole It." A memoir? Maybe. Or maybe just a record. For himself. For others. And at the top of the page, he wrote, "The world took everything from me when I refused to play dirty. So I took back something bigger. My voice." He had never planned to be a symbol. But this moment felt different. Troy stood in a rented space in Hyde Park, freshly painted, sparsely furnished. The sign hadn't gone up yet, but the vision was alive in his hands. On the wall, taped with nothing but black electrical strips, was a simple name, this. A project. A platform. A purpose. He called it that for one reason, because this was never supposed to happen. Not to him. Not to anyone. This was the silence after accusation. This was the nights when the world turned its back. This was the system that failed people who did everything right, and got buried anyway. So he built it. A network for anonymous protection. A home for whistleblowers. A place for those who refused to stay silent, but had no shield until now. No logos. No branding. No names attached to faces. Just security, strength, and a system no one could exploit. Within days, he had 5 volunteers. Former engineers, investigators, a woman who used to audit insurance scams for the state. All broken once. But not anymore. They gathered weekly. Quiet rooms. Real conversations. No pitches. Just solutions. And when one of them asked why he named it this, Troy simply replied, "Because when they tried to destroy me, this is what they left behind." And that was all he needed to say. Jobs used to mean suits. Titles. Promotions. Power lunches. Parking passes with your name on them. Troy remembered that world. Remembered the weight of it. The illusion of status. How easily people clung to titles to hide who they really were. But now? The word job meant something else. It meant purpose. He sat across from a 26-year-old programmer named Jalen, a sharp kid who had been fired from another tech firm after flagging a data theft scandal. HR covered it up. He lost his severance, his reputation, his spark. Until Troy found him. "This isn't a job," Troy said. "It's a rebuild." Jalen looked confused. "A rebuild of what?" "Of you," Troy replied. "We don't hire for roles. We build resilience." He wasn't offering desks and contracts. He was offering freedom. Real tools. Psychological recovery. Respect. The workspace had no rules about hours. No closed doors. No formality. What it had was a whiteboard filled with names, not of staff, but of systems they were exposing. Broken structures. Exploited loopholes. Corporations that thrived on silence. Troy watched them work, not as a boss, but as someone in it with them. This wasn't about taking revenge anymore. It was about rewriting how justice worked from the inside out. Because jobs come and go. But dignity? That's what they'd been robbed of. And now, they were building a place that couldn't be stolen. "Here's the guy who took down $1 billion fraud empire." That line followed Troy everywhere, in tweets, on podcasts, inside tech forums. He'd never asked for fame. But somehow, he had become a symbol people couldn't ignore. It was strange at first. Walking down the street, catching someone whisper his name. Getting nods in public cafes. The occasional stranger slipping him a folded note saying, "You gave me courage." He never responded publicly. Never corrected anyone. But he read every word. And in the quiet, when the noise of the world faded, he let himself feel something he hadn't felt since long before the betrayal: peace. It wasn't perfect. He still had scars. Still had nights when the memory of Delaney's voice cut through his sleep like glass. Still woke up sometimes wondering if any of it had been worth it. But then he'd see another headline: "Startup inspired by Maddox method protects 300+ employees from retaliation." He's not just a whistleblower, he's a movement. Maddox model now adopted in government ethics reform bill. He smiled once, quietly, alone in his kitchen. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a saint. He was just a man who refused to go silent when the world tried to shut him down. And now? Here's the reminder. That truth doesn't just survive. It fights back. It began with a question. "Is your name really Troy Maddox?" He looked up from his black coffee, pulled from his thoughts, and met the eyes of a woman across the cafe, early 30s, press badge clipped to her leather laptop bag, sharp eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. Her name was Reese Callahan. Freelance journalist. Known for chasing cold trails and turning them into headlines that forced people to pay attention. She'd been following his story for months, not as gossip, but as something else. A pattern. "What do you want?" he asked cautiously. "I want the part you haven't told anyone yet," she said. "The part where it wasn't about taking down Clay, it was about saving yourself." He didn't answer. She slid a small voice recorder across the table and said, "Off the record." Troy stared at her. Most reporters just wanted quotes, exclusives, viral moments. But her tone was different. Not greedy, curious. So he spoke. About the nights he couldn't sleep. The days he doubted if he was doing the right thing. The moment he saw Delaney's face that day in court and felt nothing but silence in his chest. Reese didn't interrupt. When he finished, she said, "You think your story is about them. But it's really about you." He looked out the window. Rain started tapping the glass. She stood to leave. "I'm writing a piece. It's not about the scandal. It's about what happens after. If you let me tell it, maybe someone who's drowning right now will finally see the surface." She paused. "You don't owe anyone anything. But maybe someone out there needs the version of you that survived." And then she was gone. He walked through the museum exhibit like a stranger visiting someone else's history. Fraud, exposing the American corporate lie, the banner read. Troy hadn't been invited. He didn't want to be. But Reese had sent a message, you should see it. Room 4. He hesitated outside the gallery, then finally stepped in. There it was. A glass case. Inside, a framed screenshot of the infamous video, Delaney at the MIC, Troy in frame, caught mid-expression. The caption underneath read, "This image went viral." But it wasn't the truth. Next to it, a side panel displayed the full timeline of events, from the party, to the leaks, to Clay's arrest, to the founding of this. Then a quote in bold, "Fraud is not always what someone does to gain power. Sometimes, it's what the powerful do to those who have none." TM. He didn't remember giving that quote. Maybe Reese paraphrased something from one of their talks. Either way, it hit him. For months, he hated that word. Fraud. It haunted him. Followed him. Tried to define him. But now? He looked at it like something buried. Like a name once carved into stone, now fading. He turned to leave, but paused at the exit. A young man stood nearby, maybe 20, reading the timeline with wide eyes. "Did you know him?" the guy asked. Troy smiled faintly. "I knew who they said he was." And he walked out without another word. He didn't expect to see her again. But life has a way of folding unfinished pages. Delaney stood outside the coffee shop he now frequented, no cameras, no drama. Just a woman who looked like she'd lost a kingdom and didn't know if she wanted it back. He held the door open, waiting. She stepped inside. No hugs. No pleasantries. They sat across from each other like ghosts reunited. "So, you never answered my letters," she said, eyes low. "I read them," he replied. "Did they mean anything?" Troy took a long sip of coffee. "They meant you wanted to feel better. Not that you were sorry." She didn't argue. Instead, she whispered, "I did love you." He nodded. "I know. But I also loved the idea of power. Control. And when Clay offered it, I grabbed it like it could fix all the things I never said to you. There it was, not an excuse. Just the truth." Troy stared out the window. "I used to think if I hurt you back, it would make it even," he said. "But it didn't. It just reminded me I was capable of becoming what I hated." Delaney blinked away tears. "Then why did you stop?" "Because I didn't want to build a life around revenge. I wanted to build one without you in it." Silence stretched. Then she stood, slipping a small envelope onto the table. "That's the last one. You can read it, or burn it." She turned and walked away. Troy didn't open it. Not yet. Some endings didn't need explanations. Just closure. The past has weight. And for Troy Maddox, it didn't come in the form of headlines or hard drives. It came in the stillness. The nights when no one called. The mornings when the world was quiet. The moments when he stood alone in a mirror and asked, "Who are you now?" That morning, he returned to the neighborhood where it all began. Old streets. Cracked sidewalks. Graffiti-tagged bus stops that hadn't changed in decades. He walked past the corner store where he used to beg for extra hours after high school. Past the garage where he'd taken apart computers with borrowed tools. Past the library where he once sat at a public terminal and applied for a tech internship he thought he'd never get. It all looked smaller now. He stopped in front of the house he grew up in. The windows were boarded up. The front yard, overgrown. But the porch still creaked the same way. He sat on the steps. And breathed. "I am not who I was," he whispered, more to himself than to the world. "I am not a broken man. I'm not a name they twisted." He thought about all the titles that had once defined him. Employee. Husband. Victim. Suspect. Ghost. But now? Now he was something else. He stood, took one last look at the house that raised him in silence and hardship, then turned back toward the city skyline. I am who I fought to become. No cameras. No press. Just a man, no longer running, no longer hiding. Just a man walking forward. The letter sat on his desk for 3 days before he finally opened it. Stamped with the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice, marked confidential. Troy's hands were steady. Not because he didn't care, but because this moment wasn't about tension. It was about confirmation. Inside was a formal acknowledgement: the information you provided directly assisted in the exposure of criminal activity involving key executives at Voxon Tech Corporation, leading to successful prosecution and policy reform. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't dramatic. But at the bottom, under the dry legal jargon, was a single handwritten note from someone within the department: you did it. And you did it clean. Troy sat back. This wasn't revenge anymore. It wasn't even justice in the way people expected. This was restoration. The truth had taken root. And it grew, not just in courtrooms or media cycles, but in the hearts of people watching. People who had once been scared to speak. Now they were creating. Building. Whistleblowing. Reclaiming. Because he did it first. Not for fame. Not for applause. But because it was right. His phone buzzed, a message from Jalen, the programmer he had mentored. We're launching the new tool this week. First beta is up. I named it a Maddox Protocol. Hope you don't mind. Troy stared at the screen for a long time. He smiled. He did it. And now? The world was changing, not because of one man, but because of what he stood for when no one else would. The clip still lived online. Faded now beneath newer trends and louder scandals, but it remained. The moment Delaney took the MIC. The moment the glass shattered. The moment Troy Maddox's world cracked in front of 100 eyes and a million strangers behind screens. He hadn't watched it in months. But today, something pulled him to it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was closure. He sat at his desk. Pressed play. The party flickered to life. The crowd. The lights. The smile on his face, young, proud, unprepared. Then, her voice. Let's toast to the man who stole this job. He's not a leader. He's a fraud. He didn't flinch. Not this time. He watched himself, frozen in that moment, not because he was guilty, but because the world was trained to believe the loudest voice in the room. And hers had been deafening. But what no one realized then was that this moment, the most humiliating second of his life, would become the ignition point. The exact second where the old version of Troy died, and the man who would change everything was born. He leaned back in his chair and pressed pause on the video. Froze the screen right where his face had dropped. He stared at it, calm now. Detached. Thank you, he whispered to the version of himself on the screen. Without that moment, I would have never become this. Then he closed the tab. Deleted the file. And let the moment finally rest. The sunlight broke through the blinds like a gentle reminder: morning had arrived. Troy stood at the window of his new office, nothing fancy, but his. Real wood floors. No secret surveillance. No fake congratulations. Across the room, whiteboards were filled with notes, diagrams, flowcharts. Not corporate metrics, but people's names. Stories. Systems they were dismantling. Lives they were rebuilding. There was movement now. Momentum. But something had shifted, not in the world, but in him. The need for revenge had dissolved. The ache for validation had quieted. What remained was focus. A few months ago, everything he touched was fueled by fire. Now? It was built with intention. He held a new letter in his hands, a request from a non-profit asking for collaboration. They wanted to use his whistleblower framework to protect teachers in public school systems facing corruption. He smiled. The ripples were spreading. And for the first time, he wasn't chasing ghosts. He was planting things that would grow long after he was gone. Reese texted. Reese, the article just dropped. Full profile. I'll send you a link. Troy, did you go easy on me? Reese, not even close. But it's honest. He grinned. She was sharp, and honest had become a rare thing in his world. He closed his laptop and stepped outside. Same city. Same skyline. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't surviving it. He was walking through it. Unburdened. Shifted. And completely whole. He hadn't spoken publicly in over 3 months. No interviews. No statements. No podcasts. But people still spoke about him. In coffee shops. In boardrooms. In classrooms. Because even when the fire ends, the smoke leaves a message in the air. And Troy Maddox had become more than just a man who exposed corruption, he became an echo. The first time he noticed it, he was reading a comment on a blog article about corporate ethics. A high school student had written, "I want to be like him." Not loud. Not famous. Just brave in silence. Another posted on a private forum, "Troy Maddox didn't destroy a company. He reminded us that one honest person can make the ground shake." He sat at home reading them, not to feed his ego, but to remind himself why he did it. He hadn't set out to be a movement. But the moment he stood back up, after being dragged, doubted, and left for dead, something shifted in the world. Others started rising, too. Whistleblowers began referencing the Maddox files when submitting cases. University ethics professors assigned his story as study material. Nonprofits used his framework to teach corporate resistance. Young interns stopped staying quiet when they saw something wrong. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about what his silence had refused to become. An echo. A pulse that didn't fade. A voice that said, "You're not alone." And you never were. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and let the sound of that echo fill the room. It didn't scream. It whispered. And it reached farther that way. There was no press. No cameras. No closing ceremony with applause or dramatic final speech. Just a man. Sitting alone on a park bench. Watching the wind move through the trees like time. Troy Maddox had learned one thing above all: sometimes peace doesn't announce itself. It arrives in the form of quiet. He had fought. He had won. He had healed. And now, he was still. The city bustled behind him, people rushing toward meetings, deadlines, lives filled with noise. But here, in this moment, there was no calendar. No war. No agenda. Just breath. He thought of everything that had been taken from him and everything he had taken back. Not just his name. Not just his work. But his center. His ability to exist without needing to prove, perform, or punish. Reese had sent him one last message that morning: "You're the story I wanted to write my whole career. But you're also the person I learned the most from." He hadn't replied. Not because he didn't care. But because some things deserve silence. He watched a small boy chase a paper plane across the sidewalk. It soared. Dipped. Caught the breeze again. Troy smiled. He closed his eyes, leaned his head back, and felt the sun warm his face. No weight. No bitterness. Just quiet. And for the first time in years, it felt like freedom. "You're not the same man anymore." Those were the words the journalist said across the table, staring at Troy like she was still trying to figure him out. He didn't answer. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was too true. The article had dropped that morning. Fireproof, The Troy Maddox Story, a full-page feature in a legacy magazine that once refused to print his name when Delaney humiliated him. Now? His face sat on the cover, unfiltered. No tie. No suit. Just a man looking straight into the lens like he had nothing left to hide. Inside the article, Rees had written, "They tried to burn him down, reputation, career, name." But he didn't just survive. He walked through the fire and came out with something they never expected: stillness. Fireproof doesn't mean untouched. It means tested, scorched, and standing anyway. Troy closed the magazine and placed it on the shelf next to a few things he never let go of: the old nameplate from his first cubicle, a photo of his mom from the only vacation they ever took, and a copy of the original leaked files, labeled The Beginning. People thought fire was the worst thing that could happen to a man. But Troy knew better. It was the cleansing. The reset. The reason he was no longer afraid of losing. Because when you've already been burned, and you're still standing, there's nothing left to fear. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Troy stepped out slowly, taking in the lobby with quiet eyes. Voxentech's old building, now owned by a different group. The company was gone, split and sold in pieces. The branding stripped. The legacy scattered. But the structure remained. Glass. Steel. Marble floors that once reflected the footsteps of liars. He walked through the space like someone walking through a museum of old memories. There, the corner where he once shook Clay's hand. There, the conference room where he gave the pitch they stole. And upstairs, the ballroom where the night began, where his wife shattered him in front of the world. He didn't go up. He didn't need to. Instead, he made his way to the mezzanine, where a new startup had set up its headquarters, a non-profit tech hub helping minority founders launch platforms that actually mattered. One of the team leads spotted him. "You're Maddox, right?" the kid asked, eyes wide. "You mind staying for the pitch session?" "Just 10 minutes. Your presence would mean something." Troy nodded once. 10 minutes turned into an hour. He sat in the back, arms crossed, watching ideas that weren't about power, but purpose. And when it ended, the youngest founder approached him. Nervous. Excited. "We've been following your story since college. You gave us the blueprint. We're here because of you." Troy shook his hand. "No. You're here because you built something when no one was watching." He walked out of the building and into the wind. The city moved on. But something inside him had closed, a loop, a cycle, a burden. He'd come full circle. And the circle hadn't ended where it started. It ended higher. The morning was quiet. No headlines. No noise. Just sunlight creeping through the window blinds like forgiveness. Troy Maddox sat at a simple oak desk. No gold nameplate. No assistant knocking every few minutes. Just him. A cup of black coffee. And a blank page. Not a blog. Not a report. A letter. The first line came easily. "To the version of me who almost gave up, thank you for holding on." He wasn't writing this for the world. He was writing it for the man who once stood in a penthouse full of applause, not knowing that the sharpest blade would come from the person beside him. He was writing it for the man who collapsed under betrayal, who nearly let silence become his grave. And he was writing it for the man who walked through fire, and didn't come out perfect, but came out whole. The last few years hadn't just changed his career. They changed his character. He learned that real strength isn't in control. It's in release. It's in choosing not to become what broke you. He finished the letter. Folded it. Placed it inside an envelope and slid it into a drawer labeled "Leave it behind." Then he stepped outside. The world looked new. Not because it had changed, but because he had. Some scars remained. Quiet ones. But they were no longer wounds. They were proof. He walked into the city without a plan. No destination. And that, somehow, felt like the most powerful ending of all. Not knowing what comes next, and finally being okay with it. This was the end of the war. And the beginning of something better. If this story left a mark on you, if you felt every betrayal, every comeback, every quiet moment where a man rebuilt himself without applause, then don't let it end here. Tap that subscribe button. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs to believe that fire doesn't destroy everyone. Sometimes it reveals who they were always meant to be. And before you go, tell me this: if your story had a title today, what would it be? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Because this was mine. And now, it's your turn.